IoT and Smart Tech, where can it take the live event? So, let's begin. Theo, very briefly, just tell us who the hell you are, why the hell you're here, and just briefly, what do you think?
So my name's Theo Priestley. I'm a futurist and technology evangelist, and it's my job to basically study future and emerging trends and see how they apply to different industries.
Hi, I'm Dave Reynolds. I'm from Grant Thornton. I look at emerging technologies and the application in business, specifically looking at early stage disruptive ventures.
So, sorry, David, I just want to, just give us a little bit more of your background, because most people will think of Grant Thornton as either accountants or lawyers, but you actually have a little more experience in the event space than that might reveal.
Yes. So I was once upon a time at a startup called TotalJobs.com, where I was head of growth. And alongside that, I also moved into Reed Elsevier, which is a FTSE 100 that also has one of the world's largest event businesses called Reed Exhibitions.
I'm Lauren Perkins. I do tech CMO work and have for the last decade. I actually started my career in experiential marketing and built Crunch Fitness's community from the ground up and was running 200 events a month for them as I scaled that up. So I've done a lot of different kinds of events across the gamut and integrated into the tech startup space for the last decade and know everything across IoT, blockchain, and a ton of other stuff we get into.
Just give us a little color on what those 200 events a month were. That's a lot. That's how many is that? 3, 4?
And that was in one market. By the time we were done, we had 8 markets, and so that number was exponentially higher. I think that there's a lot of interplay between events and community, and I think as a community manager and a community supervisor at Crunch, one of the biggest things that we were trying to do was activate our members and their networks and potential members, and not just from an acquisition standpoint, but also from a retention standpoint. And I saw it as a very sort of vital part of the marketing mix that not only was community a part of that, but community and events were directly correlated. And then as we kind of grew into the digital age, adding a lot more, not only just like simple things like how do you register and how do you capture leads, and then how does that integrate with CRM and a number of other activations, but then how do you really kind of bring that to the different digital channels so that there's a more seamless customer experience? And I guess in terms of 200 events a month, that's anything from like little pop-ups and like, local events at the gyms to like massive partnerships with like Red Bull and Nike and, doing races and concerts and, really large activations to your traditional sort of conferences in the industry.
So I guess I'm sort of focusing on this just because it's interesting, but to someone like me, the actual physical event seems like the whole thing, but actually that's the tip of the iceberg compared to what's really going on, isn't it?
It's what the outsider would see, but the amount of work that not only myself and my team did, but also everybody else in marketing and facilitating teams is quite significant.
And Rupert, tell us about yourself.
So I'm Rupert Barksfield. Nice to meet everybody here today. I started off in the industry as a drummer, moved into production, then into doing promotion of gigs and events, and then eventually ended in corporate with Google and Android as our primary clients. Grew those up across Europe, and through other series of events I ended up building and running my own digital agency, which I exited out of in April last year. And we were, I suppose, in events world, we were the digital agency that you would go to when there was something you didn't know how to build. You didn't know where to get it made. We were kind of the A-team of that. So mind-controlled claw-grabbing devices, or a cocktail machine that makes a cocktail based on your personality. That's what we would kind of build.
Was that because you actually started with Google when no one had heard of Google? And was the sort of mind-controlled claw grabber, was that because was that out of Google? Was that like, what we need is actually we need a mind-controlled claw grabber? Was that them sort of pushing this? Well, and also Android. You took Android from a thing where no one had ever heard of Android.
So certainly very much, and you'll hopefully resonate with this. That experiential, sort of 10 years ago was still very new, and I think Google were one of those brands that was able to be fun enough and able to approach their clients in a very fun way. And we often built kind of weird and wonderful digitally savvy things for them. Certainly, my start in digital definitely started, particularly with Android at the start of the app revolution.
Because Android is only 10 years old.
Yes, 10 years this year. In fact, I've just come from an event in Berlin last week celebrating the 10-year anniversary. Yes, those sort of brands allowed us to experiment digitally and more experientially. I suppose they weren't the be-all and end-all. There's lots of people out there who have driven that part of the industry.
Okay. So in talking about IoT and smart tech, IoT is the Internet of Things. It is stuff like you have a Nest thermostat at home, you have a Hive thermostat at home, you have solar panels which tell you how much energy they're generating. These are all Internet of Things devices. But also you have your badge, which you're asked to pop, which has a little thing on it. This is an Internet of Things style device because it's actually tracking you. It's telling people where you are around the conference. And smart tech as well is sort of looking at analyzing all this sort of stuff. Theo, what are the most interesting things you're seeing in terms of smart tech around live events? What are the things actually that we can do that we'll be able to do in 5 years' time, say?
So I'll give 3 examples actually, and one of them is personal. Actually 2 of them are. So I gave a talk in China at their Big Data Expo, and one of the things which we take for granted, I guess, is the registration process. And we wear badges and things like that. Now, they use facial recognition to basically check you in and out of every hall. And as you come in, as for security, we obviously check badges and we scan them and we use the little RFID tags. But the facial recognition over there is so quick, you don't actually notice it. And of course, you bring in the privacy concerns, but literally you could walk past the door and it's checked you in and it knows where you are, and that's that. So we use badges. In China, they use facial recognition, and it's instant, it's seamless. Other stuff that I've seen are wristbands that basically control the lighting and music at a gig. So it judges the mood of the crowd, how active they are. It lowers the temperature, it raises the temperature, depending on the movement. Changes the lighting and any ambient noise, and that's quite smart. Because 1, it gives everyone a chance to participate. 2, there's a lot of analytics in the background there, so there's quite a lot of things going on at work. 2 years ago, I've actually had an RFID tag implanted in my palm when I was giving a talk at CeBIT in Germany. And that's an extreme case. You're not really going to like shove things inside people just to avoid. It did. It stung like a bitch at the time. Yeah.
Does it still hurt?
No, but it's now annoying because I just want to get rid of it now. So I have to go back and do the exact reverse. But the interesting thing with that is, that's an extreme case. But in some point in the future, there probably will be ingestible kind of things where it'll become part of us, as a medical device, but they could use that and tap into that to actually drive a different experience as well.
For live events?
For live events.
Okay, interesting. David, same question to you. The most interesting, it's going to be hard to compete, but most interesting smart tech and Internet of Things that you're seeing around live events?
So I think the key thing to look at is we're all an extension of a network. So we are a node on a network. Every single person is carrying a device of some sort that connects you to that network. And just like the journey of the publishing industry, which had to evolve to do websites, the event industry has to evolve to do beacons, to do sensors, to do new computers, IoT devices. IoT devices are no longer just beacons. They're little Raspberry Pis, right? So whether that be the miniaturization of what you see in your tag today and actually becoming a computer, I think that's how we see the future emerging. Because those sort of technologies, if it's an interaction and we all have these interaction at events, effectively that's a data point. And by being a data point, you can measure it, you can predict it, you can analyze it. So for me, I think the sort of unsexy story about all of the future technology is just the underlying data and what you can actually do with that data.
So you're seeing it more in the sort of the back room rather than out front. It's in the things that happen behind. It's analyzing who comes to places, analyzing who goes where in the conference, deciding what on that basis how you'd lay out the conference the next time, or even reconfigure it dynamically.
Potentially, I think every event business turns into a data business, and you optimize that accordingly, just as you would any other data asset. I think you can get excited by some of the really cool emerging technologies. So I personally believe that virtual reality and artificial reality is going to just become another extension of connected devices around events. So I look at it in two extremes. I think there's the data angle, which is still untapped. And then the future, the 5 years piece, it's much more about virtual immersive experiences.
Okay, Lauren, again, we're sort of raising the stakes as we're going there. Rupert's pretty much going to have to fly us to the sun. But
Well, I'll see if I can raise the bar a bit. So, I mean, I think that one of the things that we're kind of not talking about that is sort of like the obvious part is what is that customer experience and how are we bringing that to life? And then how does technology facilitate that? And how does that, for event producers or brands, track? So behind the scenes, definitely agree with the data part. A venture that I moved over to London for, FlyFit, was building interactive fitness studios and mindfulness experiences in airports, starting with Heathrow. So they have been deploying beacon technology and being able to, work with sort of thinking of Heathrow as like a massive venue, and all the retailers that they're engaging with, they're looking at beacon technology, and some of the work that we sort of did on prototyping things and starting to test was really, how do you think about driving the customer experience by allowing customers to make choices, or the people that are involved in an event experience? Like, how do you actually use that information in a way where they can say, hey, I want to navigate my way, especially in bigger conferences. If you've ever been to Vegas or CES, it's like, how the hell do you figure out where you're going? I get confused, and I've been there almost every single year. But most of us wear a smartwatch or have a smart device. Like, we have so many tools already on us as consumers. So I think the first stage is, how do we use some of the new technology from a venue standpoint and interplay it with devices that customers already have, so that we can make the existing experience more seamless and less frustrating and more enjoyable. And then track that as well, so that if we've met, how do you also take some of that data, whether it's using the smartphone geolocation data, whether it's using facial recognition? There's so many different ways of doing it, but I think there's a huge leakage when it comes to events of all different kinds, that we meet all these amazing people, and we maybe follow up with 5. And half of that is because you lost business cards, or you have so many of them, or it's so much damn work to like do all the LinkedIn connections and all the Twitter connections. So I think that there's some really easy, fundamental, like customer experience, community building things that could add so much value, both to the attendees as well as to event organizers and brands. And those are the things that I think are the place to start to build into what could that look like as the technology continues to evolve and get much more pristine in terms of accuracy.
I mean, apps for conferences are increasingly common, aren't they? I mean, I'm thinking, for example, of Web Summit, which does its own app and connects people through the app, and you have conversations which can then continue well past the conference itself. And in effect, the conference is an outgrowth of the app, and all the things that you do are captured within that. Is that another space where you sort of think?
I think it's a space that's ripe for disruption. I don't work with anyone in the conference app space at the moment, so it's not to say that there's like a perfect solution that I'm working on. But I do see a huge opportunity for us to use so much new technology that's already really available and not being used. Like, a lot of the app experiences at conferences the user experiences are really clunky. It makes it really hard to connect. Like, we had at South by Southwest, I feel like it was 8 years ago, this app called Bump. Does anyone remember Bump? Yeah. Where you literally just bumped your phones against each other. I'm like, how did we have something that simple so many years ago? And yes, that company disappeared, but the technology was really quite easy to be able to say, hey, I actually want to connect with you. And obviously you have those awkward moments if somebody's like, hey, let's bump, and you're like, nope, don't want to stay in touch with you. But you could bump and then just disactivate later. But it's kind of amazing to me from an event standpoint, the connectivity between humans is the biggest value, and we're still not quite at that place where we've harnessed not just the value of human connection, but like how do we make that experience more seamless? So I think that that's sort of the first frontier before the sort of the glitzy, glamoury, like how do we, you know, have halo screens and interactive, and those things are all sort of available and coming, but I'd say the customer experience and then really connecting the people, that's probably one of the easiest places to start.
Rupert, smart, yeah, I know, here you again, you know, okay, well, what we're going to do now.
You're gonna talk
Smart
about
tech, you know, the IoT smart tech, you know, things where you've gone, oh yeah, that's absolutely, we must get this for our next event. The thing where you've gone, oh yeah, absolutely, totally.
I mean, one of the things I wanted to finish off on was actually an example of a brand using tracking technology now to make changes on their events. And the brand, which I actually found pretty surprising at the time, is Philips. So Philips had an exhibition stand at IFA. Well, they have one every year, but this year in particular, they employed Wi-Fi tracking technology and video tracking technology to understand the flow of people on their stand, and they're very precious about that. It's a big stand. They want to get as many people on it as possible. Their KPI is get as many people on the stand for as long as possible. Whether or not you believe in that KPI is another thing, but that's what it was. And they found that they had a blockage on night one, which they used their technology to understand where the flow of people were going, and so they changed it overnight. They changed the structure of the stand to put different things in different areas to make that work better. And that's a great example of using, I mean, true IoT in terms of Wi-Fi tracking devices to understand and make those changes. But I think it goes, you know, the kind of short-term goal in the next 5 years is not only to kind of embrace some of the technologies that we've already got now and use them in our events, but also to take that through to the bigger piece. So taking more of the data and applying that back to the event. So that's an example where you can use it in an exhibition environment. But in the future, you could quite conceivably look at a conference environment where I, as a user, don't go to the conference knowing that the content is what I want to see, but the content presents itself to me. My agenda creates itself for me because the software behind the conference has analyzed me, or I've allowed it to analyze which bits of my personality I wanted to analyze, and it's created the agenda for me. And I think that's where you know, this combination of IoT and AI and blockchain will kind of converge.
But when you say it creates the agenda for you, what do you mean? It sort of picks what events you which sort of, you know, speeches and stuff you should go to?
So think of an unconference, right? So when you go to an unconference, if nobody's ever been to one, you arrive in the morning, there's a big board on the wall, and the delegates decide what to talk about, so that you get the most out of the conference there. You're not just being forced to come and sit at an IoT session. But that's a serious point. If you could take that format, but rather than the boards being populated by people in the room going, yeah, I want to talk about that. Oh, there's not a subject that I really want to talk about, and that's actually representative in a small group of people. But you haven't talked to each other. There isn't the technology to talk to each other. But let's say that there is a piece of technology that can look at those people and say, no, this subject should be talked about. This is a big problem in our industry that we need to address, and there's a big portion of the people here that actually do want to cover that subject. So the agenda can create itself. I'm not saying I have all the solutions for this. I'm just this is more of a futurist view.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when it comes, I mean, I'll sort of throw this open. When it comes to implementing and using these smart tech, these IoT systems, is this something that events companies can acquire for themselves? Is this an expertise they can acquire from this, or is it something where they need to buy it in? Is it something actually where you need to find a third-party company, you know, outside company, and say, okay, we really need you people to figure out for us how we track people moving through the conference or whatever, or is it is it better done in-house or out-of-house? I guess is what I'm asking. David.
I don't think there's a perfect answer for every organisation. I think the most important thing that I've found with any adoption of new technology is just to understand where that is in your horizon. So you will have heard potentially of this thing called Three Horizons. So Horizon 1, get on with business as usual. Horizon 2, new product development. Horizon 3, the sort of disruptive, challenger, disruptive, new startup, land, moonshot type activity. So if you're adopting a technology that's well established, in an events business, that's probably business as usual. I don't think you should outsource that. If it's core to your business, then that should be in your H1 world.
But is this core? Is it core or is it external?
To my point earlier, I think any events business is a data business now. So I think it is core. I think if you do not understand the people that are walking through your door, where they're going, what they're doing, and how they're carrying on that brand engagement or community beyond post-event, then you're probably quite far behind the market.
I think that one thing that we can add to that is there's always a starting point when it comes to technology adoption. So does anyone know what beacon technology is? I just realized that we talked about it quite a bit, and you guys may not know what beacon technology is.
Don't know? If you
Raise
don't
your
know
hand
what
if you
it
know.
is, if you don't,
Okay, so there's a lot of people who actually have no idea what we're talking about.
oh, okay.
So beacon technology allows you to know where people are based on them being on Wi-Fi in your devices. So if I use Heathrow, which is one of the examples I can sort of speak to, obviously a massive sort of venue, and they mostly have permanent retail installations, but they also do a lot of pop-up stuff, and they're doing more and more of that. They can actually give you prompts on your phone if you're on the Wi-Fi to say, hey, based on your interests and your past purchases, you might be interested in blank. And if you want to go there, then they can actually navigate you in that direction. I think that where beacon technology will go is, to the point where Apple Maps actually directs you to where you're going. And I think that that's the kind of stuff where picking a venue, if you're the event organizer that has that kind of technology, is an easy way to start moving in that direction of having a more technology-driven experience where the tech supports the experience opposed to the tech being the experience. That sort of allows event organizers to partner with a venue that already has that, start to show the difference that technology can make, and then you have to get into the assessment from a strategic standpoint. What are we going to buy? What are we going to partner on? What are we going to acquire based on what our business strategy and objectives, and then how events fit into either the marketing mix, the sales mix, or however else events supports the organizational goals.
Can we talk also then about pitfalls? Because, Theo, you acknowledge that the facial recognition in China is great when it works, but one can imagine that if you tried to do that in the UK and Europe, that there'd be huge questions about the privacy aspect of how are you doing this, of how effective is it? And also, for example, with beacons. I know for myself, when I'm offered free Wi-Fi in places, often I don't join it because I know exactly what they're looking to do, which is to track me. And I don't necessarily want to be tracked. I sort of feel that that's something where I want to have as much of an option about what shops or whatever I go into as I can. What are the potential pitfalls that we might see from trying to introduce these sorts of things in live events?
So there's compliance and there's privacy and security. So compliance, well, we've all been hit by GDPR, very boring topic, but unfortunately, it's now reared its head in every industry. You have to opt in, you have to ask permission, you have to be very transparent about what you're collecting. If it's breached, you're in big trouble and there's big fines. And for an event company with thousands of people walking through the door, you've got thousands of users or individuals who you now have to ask permission to gather specific amounts of information for. Remember the smart bins in London that were just collecting people's Wi-Fi tags as they were walking past, but it wasn't disclosed? They got hammered and eventually, shut down. But, that's an intrusive piece of technology and very stealthily collecting details around you. Security-wise, well, you can camp in a cafe, for example, and set up a hotspot and call it free Wi-Fi, and then people will actually log in and go, oh, I don't have to sign in screen or anything, and basically you're collecting everyone's details as they do it. These are, some of the pitfalls as well in terms of security is, how do you secure that information that people are opting to give you? Some of it can be very personal in terms of age, gender, something that's identifiable to you that someone could easily camp in a corner of the conference, pop up a Wi-Fi or a Bluetooth connection and have people connecting to it by accident, whether they fake themselves as a beacon or as a Wi-Fi hotspot, and they're collecting the same information unbeknownst to the people in the experience. So there's privacy, there's security concerns, but it's really interesting touching on the shaping of things and the data behind it. If you look at Amazon Go, for example, in the US, where they're starting
which is a shop that you don't have to buy anything in it. Or you buy things in it, but you don't have to check out. So
yeah, you can literally walk in, grab stuff, and check.
It's all
out.
RFID tags.
Yeah, everyone thinks, oh, this is really clever. This is the future of shopping. Well, actually, it's the future of basically data collection as well. When you look at it, Amazon is starting to track all your retail habits outside of the online world. So they now know your bricks and mortar habit. They can now track what you do, how long it takes in the shop, and it goes back to Rupert's point about shaping the experience as they go or for the next day, because they can basically track everyone in the shop and they go, oh, you lingered too long in that corner, there's something wrong in that corner, so now we have to change the experience again. But again, it's all about how much of that data do you really need to shape the conference, how do we collect it safely, and how do we comply with the regulation to do it?
Because I mean, I imagine, if you're an events company, you're collecting lots of data, then security from hackers, just breaking into your database must also be a big concern.
I think one of the most important things when we talk about data and privacy, especially from a brand experience, whether you use Amazon or you use the Philips example, is when you add significant value to the end user and they're aware of that and they get to participate in that value and there's transparency on what's being collected, a lot of people will choose to opt in because there's value in it for them. So I think one of the biggest things in terms of thinking about data and collecting data is most people go to events, whether it's they're going to a brand event or whether they're going to an industry event, because there's significant value in it for them. So if the data is used in a way that's going to also add value to them, whether it's I have less frustration on Amazon because all the shit that I don't want doesn't show up anymore, and I can be more efficient in my shopping, I'm happy to give them, like, I like these brands, I hate these brands. Like, I would even say that there are going to be a lot of opt-in, opt-out options as things continue to evolve, where those of us who are willing to give more data are going to get even better experiences and more seamless experiences as a result. So I think that in some ways, this is actually a marketing and communications hurdle in terms of like how do we actually explain to customers what we're taking and what they're getting in exchange so that it's a value exchange. It's not just like super greedy, like the brand or the event is getting all the value from it, because when the end user or the customer gets value, a lot of times it's really just building that relationship. And I think that we sort of, with all of the sort of concerns on privacy and regulation, we sometimes forget that there's a lot of customers who, with the right simple communication and transparency, would happily opt in, but not when there's zero value in it for them.
So I mean, I guess it's slightly easier to make that case with a conference that's a 3-day conference where you can say, and your tag will automatically suggest the things to go to. More difficult if you've got a big gig in Wembley Arena or something, and you're getting tens of thousands of people along to see you too or something. It's a bit more difficult to explain why people should give you their data there, isn't it?
It all comes down to the value exchange. So if a user or a participant believes that they're getting a good value exchange, they will want to do it. And I've got a great example of that. So in 2014, we did the Super Bowl in New York, and we built a unit for Verizon where every user that came through, we collected their data and then we locked it to their thumbprint. And what we found is that 60% of the people that arrived at the data collection pod were okay with that. But 40% of people said, nah, I don't want to lock my thumbprint to anything. They went into the experience and there was a generic experience that they could do. But what we found was 50% of that 40% came back to the registration after they realized what they were missing out on. And because all of the experiences inside the zone were tailored based on that data we collected at the beginning. Just simple stuff, your name, your date of birth, your favorite NFL team, made each experience, be it augmented reality or be it a kind of a video participation experience, they're all custom and personalized, which people want. But they weren't getting that with the generic without giving their data over. Now, granted, that was before Cambridge Analytica and the other hacks that have been very, well publicized there. But as long as there's a decent value exchange, there's usually not too much of a kind of an issue about obtaining user data. And then it's just about being responsible with that. And I think actually in events industries, we're probably not super responsible yet because we haven't had the sort of investment on that side of things like you would in the deep tech. Yeah. And in the way that delegate lists get emailed round as Excel files all the time and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens because you've got to do a job at the end of the day, but equally it's not particularly safe.
Yeah.
How are we doing for time? I just want to check on that. For time?
15, 20 minutes.
Okay, great. Okay, so I know Lauren and Rupert. I think you're both itching to talk about blockchain, which I think we can sort of define as a smart tech, sort of. I mean,
Supporting
it's
technology at this point.
technology that underlies Bitcoin, but also is a decentralized, non-rewritable database, a ledger basically, which always goes forward. Useful for ticketing? Might we see it being used for ticketing in the next few years? I mean, because we hear, for example, all the rows about Ed Sheeran, ticketing, secondary ticketing markets, stuff like that. Is that actually an application we could see?
Well, we were just talking about this just off stage before coming up, and I think really in the future, what we're going to see is less of Eventbrite taking your data, or less of Facebook events taking your data, or whatever it is. There is going to be, hypothesize a central source where you keep all of your data. And that is not only your name, the date of birth, and the kind of normal stuff. It's also your passport details, your driving license, your criminal record. All of this will be kept in a personal blockchain, for want of a better word. And then you will allow events or websites to say to either look at that data, or for it to reference that database, and for the database to say, yeah, this person's allowed in because of X, or this person is the right age, or this person, it's not saying that this person is 34, it's saying that this person is allowed in. Mm-hmm. And so it's not giving away your data, you're still retaining control of it, but it allows you access, it allows for that value exchange.
But that's quite a complex concept you're describing there. I mean, but just on the more boring, the mundane thing of, Ed Sheeran has a gig, and he says, okay, these tickets are going to be on blockchain, so I know exactly who they've gone to, and they can't be resold, which is, a big thing. Is that a feasible?
Or if they're resold, you can see the tracking. So the whole idea with sort of a ledger system is that it's append only, which means you can't ever edit it, you can only add to it. So I think that some of the cool stuff that we could see in the event space with sort of more simple applications of blockchain is, I register for an event, and then we know that I've registered. I either, invite somebody else, or I transfer my ticket for one day, or I register for a panel and then I change it. Being able to see that user behavior of, well, what did I think I was interested in, and then, how did I change it? So there's lots of very sort of interesting, sort of more simple applications just from like the registration and the event management side. If you were to take more of a learning type conference or anything that has sessions, that could be quite fascinating. And if we were to add a little bit of sort of AI to it to be able to actually assess and or make recommendations of, hey, in social you're talking about these things, you might actually be really interested in this topic. I always hate when I go to something big like a CES or a South by, because I look at the whole event calendar and I'm like, oh, can I have an assistant like pick my panel? So I actually have my admin manual, God bless my assistant Sarah, is like literally like this long. It's a Google Doc, so she can search it. But like there's rules for everything when I go to conferences. I think as AI gets smarter and the addition of blockchain, we know what we're interested in. Social listening knows. The fact that I still, as a human, have to do all this sifting and sorting to say, I'm interested in these things, that's not relevant. Like, I'm interested in emerging tech, but stuff that, has already been fully adopted, like, I'm no longer interested in. Like, those are things that, like, the internet knows about me already. So how do we use that information to make sort of our agendas smarter, and then our own personal agendas as well as the event organizer agenda, I think is really interesting.
But doesn't that kill the concept of serendipity? You know, the person who sort of wandered into this thing on IoT and Smart Tech and said, I never thought I'd get to hear about Ed Sheeran and blockchain. I mean, is that not the risk that we then run?
Too tailored a conference.
Yeah, that it's like you really get sort of almost put into your bubble, you know, your bubble.
Well, you see, that's kind of where machine learning and AI or algorithms can help, in which case it's like, it can look at the agenda that it's actually created for you, or the one that you've created for yourself, and you've said, well, actually, you're too IoT-centric, for example, so let's chuck in a few suggestions here and actually just shake it up a bit and say, go and see something, you know, go and see this speaker because he's going to talk about nothing about IoT, but you might learn something new. And this is the point where we're at with social and fake news and stuff, which is actually trying to burst our way out of those sort of echo chambers. And you can get an event version of that echo chamber by just going to the same people. Actually, there's another thing as well, is actually inviting the same speakers to your events, because I see this all the time. You see the same speakers, you see the same faces, and you think, I'm not going to learn anything new. And then you eventually actually don't bother going to that conference again. So for a conference to actually say, who have we never had on this stage? Who's never spoken actually, but actually looks like a really interesting personality? I would love that kind of thing to start creeping into event tech, because, like I said, it becomes a full-time job for some speakers, and you don't want to see the same speakers over and over again.
Okay. I mean, we've got a few minutes left. I'll throw it open to questions in a minute, but maybe if we round up with what's the biggest change you expect to see in the next 5 years that will be enabled by IoT and Smart Tech? And I'll take it from Rupert backwards.
Oh, excuse me. So I've talked about this at a few different events, but the biggest tech in the next 5 years that's going to change events in particular, and it's all driven by IoT, but it's slightly more tenuous, is probably driverless vehicles. Because if we're able to really embrace, and maybe we're a bit beyond 5 years, but if we're able to really embrace driverless vehicles, then the event extends far beyond. The physical interaction with people extends far beyond the actual conference venue or the exhibition venue, because you can start to have vehicles picking up delegates and attendees and start having breakouts on the way there. You can start to have that initial communication. The delegates could be not only grouped together by location, but also their subject type that they want to understand and talk about there. You could have the keynote in the vehicle before you get there, so that you then go into breakouts, for example. You know, there's all sorts of different bits of technology which, arguably you could do now with
chauffeurs.
With chauffeurs, but the costs available. You know, Uber are predicting that their driverless vehicles will drop the rate of taxis down by 90%. So with that sort of drop, it suddenly gives the opportunity of venue and venue space much broader.
Lauren?
So I actually think that technology and all of the different types of IoT and AI and blockchain and all of the different tools that we have at our disposal are actually going to create more serendipity, but in a slightly different way. I think that we're going to be able to use the information that we have to have, if you've ever been to an event and you're like, oh, I had this amazing run-in with this person. Even if you use Rupert's example, we can start to create those serendipitous moments and make them feel very like, oh my God, from an event experience, regardless of the type of event, using data and technology, and it's going to show up in so many different ways. And so I think that being able to evolve the customer experience to create a lot more relevance in the next 5 years is the thing I'm most excited to see.
Okay. David?
For me, I still go to events and there's people standing there researching, observing, asking questions at the end, asking me to fill something out. The technology has evolved so much that actually you should be able to infer so much more than people actually do right now. So I'd still hamper on the point of data. We're still not even touching the tip of the iceberg around what we can actually do with data. And I think when you are when you're a business looking at innovations within your market. What's the thing that's 5 years out? Well, the pace of change in technology evolves so fast that you want to be looking at the emerging disruptors, the startups, going to those communities and seeing what they're actually doing, because we probably don't even know what it is, but it will probably hit us within 5 years.
Virtual reality, do you think we'll have a virtual reality conference within 5 years?
I absolutely do. I personally believe that virtual reality will change the face of the event and conference scene. So where is the fully immersive experience, to your point of customer experience? How do you get more customer-centric than a bespoke virtual reality environment? You absolutely lose a huge proportion of those personal connections, but I think they will find a way of integrating that in, because you only have to look at what Facebook are doing with their new version of Oculus, which is coming out next year, the Oculus Guest. That is going to be a mainstream device for £300. You don't need a high-powered gaming machine anymore to get stuff like this. So definitely one to watch.
And Theo?
I'm going to disagree.
Go ahead. Disagreement. We don't get enough disagreement.
So back in 2008, I actually tried to run a virtual reality conference and zero interest. Last year, I was supposed to be a speaker at a virtual reality conference, folded. So the technology is not there to actually host a virtual, a conference virtually. You can have classrooms,
but... Is it a technology issue, or is it an interaction issue that people just don't like?
People come to a conference to interact, and you can't get that same human connection with a platform, and you're sitting there with goggles on. And I know it's the idea of removing the barrier to entry in terms of location, cost to travel, etc., is very attractive, but the practicalities of actually running a conference and then having that engagement factor, destroy it, utterly destroy it, and we're not there yet, neither is the tech. Augmented reality is quite interesting, but again, it's far too gimmicky at the moment.
Augmented reality being, just explain that for the audience.
So where virtual reality, actually you put a pair of goggles on and you're closed off to the outside world, augmented reality allows you to see and overlay information as you're walking around. So if you can imagine,
it might be on your smartphone, or it might be if you've got
exactly.
The right
but what I see with augmented reality, the same problem with VR, is you're breaking the process for the user.
You're putting something in between you and the world.
The technology should be invisible in an event. That's it. You should never actually see what's going on, or or what's happening in the background. So that VR and AR, I think, is going to break that. I think by the time we actually figure out what to do with those, holographic technology will take over anyway. So in the next 5 years, we're going to see more holographic kind of stuff coming out, to the point where 10 years' time is actually going to be, holograms on stage, and you'll be able to host conferences in multiple locations and actually have the same speaker on the stage.
Can I predict the first person will be will.i.am to do this?
Well,
I mean, because he always is, isn't he? It's always will.i.am.
If there's an event startup in there looking, in the audience, then go for it.
Terrific, thank you. Okay, I don't know how we're now. I think it's 12:45. Are we up to time?
We've got 5 minutes if you want.
5 minutes. Okay. If anyone has any questions, and if will.i.am is not in the audience, does anyone have any questions, and we can chuck the ball. Hey.
Hello. I work at a venue, one of Europe's largest venues, and I was really interested talking about Heathrow and the different. I'll just squish over the side so I see.
Be closer as well.
Yeah. And one of the things that we've noticed, we have beacon technology in our venue, for example, and we have 460 access points. We can support up to 20,000 concurrent devices, things like that. We have the technology, and everyone who works in our IT department and our marketing department is really into it. But trickling down to our exhibitors, and specifically the people in our stands and the people who are attending our conferences, they don't download the app as often. They don't use the lead tracking system. They don't follow up. They don't download the list. They don't download the analysis afterwards. How do we get them more engaged? Because we're interested, but they're not.
I called bullshit on Apple's iBeacon years ago when it first came out, and I've seen the adoption rate plummet. My advice is don't spend the money on it, because one, we've already discussed the fact that conference apps are diabolical. I never use one, I never have. If you're still printing out conference brochures, for example, people are wondering about with that before they actually look at their phone anyway. So in fact, you're actually defeating the purpose of producing a all singing, all dancing app and then printing off a brochure that people can pick up and look at, because it's more visual, it's easy, they don't have to play around with something, it's very nice. Oh, Tinder, I can go swipe left if I want to go to this one and swipe right if I don't, or the other way around. I don't know how it works, but he says. But yeah, I wouldn't bother looking at Beacon technology anymore because it was dud when it first came out.
Just to help out, that way. There are different types of beacon technology. So I think you're referring to obviously iBeacons, which is more Bluetooth.
Just beacon in general, I think.
I think you're referring to Wi-Fi in terms of Wi-Fi tracking in the venue. And when it comes to your clients, or the event organizers using it, I would come back to what's the value exchange for them? What is the value of that data to them? If they don't want to know how many people have come to their stand, like they don't want to know it.
Which we all know is not true.
Well,
we may not be having the right conversation.
Yeah.
Like everyone, if you're spending money to exhibit an event, somebody, it may not be the person running the booth, but somebody, whether it's their boss or their boss's boss, they want that data and they want to know what ROI is and they want to know what success looks like. I find that there's like two major breakdowns that keep it from being successful. Either the app UI UX is so terrible that people can't use it easily, or the actual conversation and the sort of operational process around getting people on board and the value exchange. So do people have the app far enough in advance? Are they planning it into their whole operational plan? Like we know that events are like a massive operational process from somebody who used to run so many each month. If you don't have that in the plan of how you're using technology, how the app is being used, what are you tracking, why are you tracking it, and all of that, it won't get used. So you need to start that much earlier in the process, potentially, and I would say ideally, at the sell-through point. So if somebody's buying in.
Sorry, she's also describing, though, that the people going to the conference, the actual attendees, aren't as engaged. They're not downloading the app, right? That's the sort of thing you're saying.
Among other things, we've got feedback, for example, that when we launched the app, it was you had to buy it, for example. People weren't downloading it, so we made it free. People still weren't downloading it as much.
Because people just don't want another app on their phone, perhaps.
I think the important thing with all of these adoptions of any app technology is just go back to basic principles. Actually, customer-centric design, as you say, really understand what problem you're solving for that customer, so that you can actually just design the best possible app. I know it's really simple, but be that an onboarding process, the UI, the UX, but really what value can they get out there?
But isn't the difficulty, though, that, as Theo said, if you've got a brochure, a printed brochure, people are going to take that. Yeah. So you have to say, okay, we're not doing any printed brochures, we're just doing apps. And people are going to go, really?
Yeah. I mean, how many of us actually want to carry paper around? Like most of us would like to show up to an event and not have to get any postcards or any like heavy books. Like we want to travel around light. The problem is that we are still, I think in the event experience world, we're not spending enough money on reducing the friction in the digital experience. And I think it's one of the biggest hurdles. And so, is the opportunity with the venue? Is it with some of the bigger brands that have budget? I think that those are two easy places because they can make that investment and have it sort of across multiple events and multiple touch points. But I think the friction is part of the problem.
If you look at the South by Southwest app, it's absolutely amazing and everyone downloads it.
Absolutely.
Everyone downloads it. And that's because it's a
And it didn't start that way, but they had terrible adoption, so they invested a ton of time and money into it.
And money.
Yep.
It's that thing that makes the difference. What's the added value? And everyone's been saying the same thing. What's the value exchange for the customer, for the client, for the visitor? They're not going to do anything unless there's real value in it for them. And you've got to make sure that the app is rich with content. Otherwise, people don't go to it. If it's just a list of the, all the presentations, contact names, LinkedIn, the bump technology, which has gone somewhere else now, but it's all still out there. And that's what needs to be in the app anyway.
Look at China. Look to the east. Look at how China operates.
Yeah.
Because we're so Western about our approaches with a lot of things. Yeah. But
Confucius, he say, conference app, really good. Anyway, please thank an amazing panel.
Welcome.